The US Open has given us some great winners over the last 5 years. Surprisingly though, they won those majors with some of the least desirable drivers to come out over the last 5 years. But is no one buying these drivers due to performance or a false perception that you should be taking advantage of? So let me break down the advantages and disadvantages of each driver. The very reasonable prices that these drivers go for, especially one of the last one that's the newest and is virtually the cheapest. And then lastly, ironically, confirm that what brand and model the pros are using to win said major means absolutely nothing to me and you, because they're all so similar, they'd win with virtually anything in their hands. Bryson DeChambeau's win in 2020 is a prime example of this, but before that, 2019 with Gary Woodland, and one of the only unpopular Ping drivers to ever have come out, which of course is the Ping G410. And thank you to the guys at Replay Golf for supplying all these drivers, and they're celebrating the US Open week with 10% off everything in their store with the code SASGolf10. However, it did mean I had to find a theme for the US Open video for themselves, and I couldn't quite believe the trends that I was seeing, especially for the first 3 drivers in this list. And I'm not saying any of these are bad drivers, but more of public perception. And if you're a US Open knowledge buff, I'll also explain why the last driver also conforms to this list. Now, I talk a lot about Ping drivers, reliable, forgiving, very much geared for the average golfer, but let me explain why this one was, well, a bit of a curveball. You see, the G400 Max came out the year before this. Statistically, the most forgiving driver of all time, only being eclipsed, well, this year. And to be honest, if you're a big Ping fan and you've just seen that, you're expecting, well, more of what you've just seen. However, the Ping G410 for me is a jack of all trades, master of none, and to be honest, some of you would get on very well with this driver. So let's run through some of the negatives. Rather aggressive looking graphics from the Ping, and it makes sense because I do feel they were trying to tap into the younger market. This was also the first installment of adjustable weighting, again appealing to that club tinkerer. Not to mention the G410 was only 455cc rather than the allowed limit of 460, which you can only presume was to lower that spin a touch. Give yourself a bit more of an advantage of getting it down there. What we have here is a not so fine-tuned Ping G425, one with a bit more of a sleeker adjustable weighting system. A 460cc, i.e. pushing the limits of what a driver head shape size can be, and a lot more subtle detailing on the bottom of the driver, which probably explains why the Ping G425 second-hand price is holding so well. 2020 was Bryson's transformation year, with him taking the title at Winged Foot, and in the process silencing a lot of doubters with that victory. With only 23 fairways found that week, I can honestly say this is the only time that me and a professional golfer share somewhat the same tactic, i.e. hit it as hard as you can off the tee and just hope you have a short enough iron that I can get it to stop on the green. Therefore, when you're thinking what was the longest driver in 2020, I pretty much guarantee none of you would have thought this thing. And I will talk about the parts of this driver that I do like, apart from the price. However, there's 2 major things that this driver in particular highlights. Number 1 is not the most low spinning head, and yes, you can move these weights about, but Bryson had a 7.5 degree head lofted down to 5.5, and I couldn't care how high spinning or low spinning your driver is. If you can't get the right spin loft, you're going to have too low a spin or too high a spin. And one of my biggest bugbears is amateur golfers getting fitted into a low spin head because they spin at 3.5 or 4,000 with their driver. It's not going to make the slightest bit of difference. And for that 400, 500, 600 RPM that you've knocked down off your spin and gained a tiny bit more distance, you've lost in forgiveness as those heads aren't as forgiving. Not to mention making your bad shot, whether it's left or right, that much worse. The second thing that this driver highlights is how much drivers are a popularity contest, a beauty contest. Because the F9 that came out before it sung all the praises in social media because it was cheaper. And yes, it was an extremely good driver, but its second-hand price is still somewhat higher than this one, or is virtually the same, because all of those reviews. And to be honest, these speed zones that have the Infinity Crown, which by the way, I loved, especially for beginners, because if you sky it, well, you're not scratching the paint job. But hold your horses, because I want to show you the prices this goes for. Let's say 120 to 140. And an example of, I don't think Cobra's quite got that buzz as it did from the F9, as prices of the Aerojet came out last year, £40 more, £30 more. And I'm sure Cobra would be able to tell me how this one is more advanced than this one. But looking at both of these, I don't think either of them are bad value for how good equipment Cobra makes. It just doesn't seem like they're winning the popularity game. As a side note to add on to that, I'd love to know how many crank-fire drivers have been sold over the last year since Bryson shot that infamous 58. 2021 John Rahm, a very much contested win at Torrey Pines. Calm, collected, very much consistent, especially having to pull out from the Memorial the week before. All of these things which potentially couldn't be said the same for a lot of Callaway's makes, models, different versions over the last 8 years. And there's no question Callaway makes great equipment, from drivers, irons, wedges, putters, you name it. But until recently, some of the models seem more like clickbait rather than methodically thought through. I'm talking about the Maverick, I'm talking about the Epic Flash, I'm talking about the Big Bertha 21, the Epic Speed range, still trying to ride on the coattails of the infamous Great Big Bertha Epic Original. And with that being said, the Epic Speed is a great driver, hence why I'm showing it in this list, as well as John Rahm obviously won at Torrey Pines with it. However, Callaway has the secret sauce now, and it's not necessarily going into their driver equipment. There's no question TaylorMade has dominated social media for the last 10 years when it comes to content creation. However, Callaway now is giving a run for their money. Brand deals, influencers, social media presence is arguably the biggest difference in club sales since this came out. And the best thing is, I feel like this is just as good as the Rogue ST, Paradigm and Callaway AI Smoke. I can't remember where I read it, but it was about Cadbury's chocolate and why they made it round rather than the squares, because it would taste better through shape alone, even though the ingredients stayed exactly the same, and that is placebo. There's no question in my mind golfers would hit this Paradigm today better than this Epic Speed. Not because of statistics, not necessarily with numbers, especially if you could put the same shaft and loft head type in both of these, but more down to placebo. Now I'm going to keep this brief because I'm going to let a few of you down, as this next installment certainly isn't unpopular, and for a lot of you guys that know who won the last 2 US Opens, you're probably wondering how I'm going to be able to spin this off. Oh, I do love this thing. Fitzpatrick and Wyndham Clark both won the last 2 US Opens with a TSI 3, which by the way I rated as the best value driver from Titleist over the last 10 years. I've made quite a lot of videos about pros using older clubs in their bag, whether it's fairway woods, drivers, irons, you name it. And the point is, when they have a club in the bag that works, is consistent, but versus that dispersion and distance graph, works incredibly well under pressure. Now for Matt's win, the TSR3 hadn't come out yet. Therefore, he was using the most up-to-date. But it's only February this year, 2 years later, that he's seen testing this, which is ironic considering the GT series is coming out. And Wyndham Clark last year chose to use the TSI3 versus the TSR3. This is just a friendly reminder for you guys that have that favorite club. And because it works so well, you feel like you could get more out of a better fitted one. You feel like spending a bit more money on a new upgraded version of your old faithful means you keep the consistency. And then you also get a lot more distance, because 9 times out of 10, that miracle club that's consistent is consistent for a reason and very difficult to replicate just with technology alone. Again, thank you to the guys at Replay Golf, SAS Golf 10 if you want 10% off all equipment in their store. If you've got any questions on your golf swing or equipment, sasgolfacademy.com, and I'll catch you guys later.